All right, Zika, I have a quick question for you.
Hit me.
Do you prefer bourbon or whiskey?
The age-old debate. Solid question, Ryan, but are you just asking me this, or are you just trying to justify what's in your coffee mug right now?
If there was any alcohol in my coffee, it would be of the Irish whiskey variety. As an O'Leary,
Yes.
that's the only alcohol that would go in the coffee. But for me personally, like walking down the bourbon aisle in the store, I look at a bourbon like Bullet Rye and the Bullet Bourbon. I don't really know the difference between the two. I actually thought Bullet Rye was a bourbon. It's not. Help educate me and anybody else who doesn't know the difference, what that difference is.
Man, I think this is a very common misconception. I get a lot of questions on this, and I've been in your shoes. Please trust me. But ultimately, I think about it as when someone asks me, what type of automobile do you drive? That's like asking me, what type of whiskey do you like? What type of whiskey do I like? Well, shit, I love bourbons, right? That's why we're here on the podcast to talk about them. But there's also, Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey, American, Canadian, Japanese, like go down the list, right? So whiskey, I look at it as like an automobile. There's GMC, Chevrolet, Mitsubishi. So whiskey is basically a liquid magic crafted from a fermented grain mash. So whether it's made from barley, corn, rye, or wheat, each grain specifically brings its own unique flavor profile to the party. The process, it's actually kind of an art, right? So everything comes from the grains to the fermentation, distillation, and aging process that ultimately creates these endless flavor profiles. And the fun part is the style and the taste can change dramatically depending on where it's made, right? Geography, where it's stored in the rickhouse, and so forth. We'll get onto that in later episodes. So in this case, let's dive into a little bit more about specifically what is a bourbon and what officially adheres to the specific guidelines of the bourbon in general. Okay, so number one, it's made in the USA.
America.
Exactly. So most of it obviously hails from Kentucky, a lot of the good ones. Again, we'll get into more of that, but there's a lot of good bourbon outside of Kentucky as well. I will say that. I know there's going to be a lot of hate on that, but I respect it. Number two, mash bill. Grain mixture must be at least 51% corn. The rest of it's typically made of, rye, barleys, and wheat. Number three, new charred oak barrels. So this gives the bourbon a distinctive flavor and amber coloring. And number four, proof level. So it must be distilled no more than 160 proof and enter the barrel for aging, the distillation process, no more than 125 proof, and then finally bottled at no less than 80 proof.
You just said the word proof a lot. What exactly are we talking about when we talk about proof?
Well, I can tell you what we're not talking about, and that's geometry. Not my strong suit. We're not talking about geometry proofs. We're talking about dividing.
Was that a math joke? Because I didn't even pick it up.
It was my worst subject.
Good for you.
Yeah,
good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk about proof here, we're talking about divide it in two, and that's when you get the ABV or alcohol content, right? So if we're looking at an 80 proof.
40% alcohol.
Correct.
Okay, beautiful. I just learned.
Sometimes you impress even yourself.
I'm impressed. Go on. There's one more.
And last, we're talking about no additives. Pretty straightforward. The more you learn about spirits, the more you understand additives are definitely a thing. And that's why I love the natural distillation process of a good bourbon, because it's truly from the ground to the glass to the palate.
It's organic.
Exactly.
It's healthy.
Absolutely, man. So anyway, those are the 5 kind of key topics that I wanted to touch base on about like what makes a bourbon before we kind of dive into the pod. Super important that I think everybody knows a little bit about what a whiskey is versus what a bourbon is, and the entire hierarchy of how everything kind of circulates in the bourbon realm here. So next time that you sip a glass of bourbon, just know that, you know what, you're not just tasting whiskey, you're sipping on a piece of American history, Ryan.
It all comes back to number one.
Absolutely.
America.